And Catherine. All right. Well, let's do it. Full house. Where is Michelle? Michelle, are you okay?
Yep, I'm here. I'm ready.
All right, let's not waste any time here. I see Mr. Maynard is almost ready to jump out of his seat. So let's do it. All right, here we go.
Can't control myself.
That's right. That excitement's palpable. Thank you. All right. Good evening and welcome to the December 7th, 2020 meeting of the City of Summit Zoning Board of Adjustment. My name is Stephen Spur and I am chairman of the Summit Zoning Board. In accordance with New Jersey Statute 10:10-4, adequate notice of this meeting has been provided to a newspaper of record and has been posted here in City Hall. This meeting is a judicial proceeding. Any questions or comments must be limited to the issues that are relevant to what the board may legally consider in reaching a decision, and decorum appropriate for a judicial hearing must be maintained at all times. This meeting is being conducted virtually via video conferencing in lieu of meeting in the council chamber at Summit City Hall, Summit, New Jersey. This meeting is being live streamed to the city's YouTube page. In addition, members of the public can view and participate in the meeting by following the link provided on the agenda. Members of the public may also submit written comments and questions to the zoning board secretary in advance of the meeting to be read aloud during the meeting. Such written comments shall not be considered testimonial and shall not be considered by the board in its determination on any application. Individuals wishing to provide testimony as to any application must participate virtually with both audio and video enabled. Dennis Galvin is the zoning board's attorney. He will advise the board members on matters of law and is the key interface with an applicant's attorney. Mr. Galvin does not vote on the applications. Chris Nicola is a city employee and is the zoning board secretary. Mr. Nicola works with applicants on getting their applications together, planning our agendas, and keeping our meeting minutes. Mr. Nicola also does not vote on the application. Our board consists of 7 regular members and up to 4 alternates. All members can participate in the hearing tonight, but a maximum of 7 can vote. Most applications require a simple majority to be approved. Some applications require 5 affirmative votes to be approved. You'll be told which majority will be required before we begin our deliberations. Mr. Nicola, will you please call the roll of the members?
Sure. Chairman Spur?
Here.
Vice Chairwoman Newell?
Here.
Yuko?
Here.
Mr. Steiner, we're expecting later. Mr. Mullen?
Here.
Ms. Schwartzstein?
Here.
Mr. Malay?
Here.
Mr. Loikitz?
Here.
And Ms. Toth.
Here.
Proceed.
We generally hear the cases in the order they are listed on the agenda. We try to have each hearing last no more than 30 minutes, but we do understand that some cases are too complex to be heard within that time frame. Each hearing begins with the applicant or their attorney giving an overview of the application and the variances that are required. We then hear from any expert witnesses the applicant may have to help explain the application and why the variances are needed. The board members may ask questions of the applicant, their attorney, and the expert witnesses. Once the board members and the board professionals are done with their questioning, the public will have an opportunity to ask questions. This is not the time to tell us what you think about this case. That opportunity comes at the end of the hearing. Before you ask your questions, we need to know who you are and where you live. It is important that our court reporter be able to keep a clear and accurate public record. Please state your name before speaking or asking a question. And please do not talk over each other. This is even more important under the current circumstances. After all witnesses have been heard, members of the audience have their second opportunity to speak. And at that time, you may express your opinion, positive or negative, about the application. When the public hearing is closed, we go into executive session where the board members discuss the case and vote. You will be able to listen to our executive session, but you will not normally be able to participate in the discussion. Most applications are heard and decided in the same evening. If the case requires additional information or testimony that cannot be presented tonight, we will carry the case to another date and it will not be decided. Krista Anderson, the city zoning officer, has asked that I remind all applicants that they must read carefully the resolution that documents the zoning board's decision and to pay particular attention to the conditions contained in the resolution. For example, if a landscaping plan is required, you must obtain one and submit it to John Linson, the city's forester. If a grading plan is required, you must have one prepared by a civil engineer and submit 3 copies, along with the application fee to the city's engineering division. Failure to satisfy all conditions in a resolution will result in a delay in approving your application, as it will cause extra work for city zoning staff. The resolutions documenting the board's decision will normally be available 1 month after we decide the case. This evening's agenda is limited to the continuation of a public hearing, that being 4 Waldron Avenue, Beacon Unitarian Church. And then I'll just note for the members, we have also 2 resolutions to memorialize, minutes to approve, an annual report to discuss, a calendar to review, and then finally executive session to break into to discuss professional appointments for 2021. So Mr. Maynard, it's just to kind of give you and Mr. Kronheim a heads up that we will be watching the clock tonight. There's a couple of administrative matters on the end of the session that we want to keep an eye on. I know Mr. Steiner is not attending because he would otherwise be recused for this case, and I believe Ms. Toth is going to recuse as well. So with that, Mr. Minor, if you'd like to kick us back off.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Roger Maynor, Summit Office of Lindaberry, McCormick, Estabrook, and Cooper, and I represent the applicant, Beacon Unitarian. Last meeting, we finished the testimony of 2 more of our witnesses, Mr. Patel, our site engineer, and Betsy Dolan, our parking expert. We have 1 more witness, that is Paul Phillips, our professional planner. And I would like to, unless there are other issues, call Mr. Phillips to the stand.
No issues. Mr. Galvin?
Yes. Mr. Phillips, raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Phillips' credentials are pretty well known. Do we accept him as a professional planner?
We do. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, before we go forward, this opposing counsel have concerns.
No objections.
Okay, you're good to go.
Thanks. Mr. Phillips, just can you confirm for the board that you have watched the first 2 nights of testimony, the testimony of the previous 4 witnesses?
I have.
Okay.
And you have,
have you and you have reviewed the application and the other documents filed with the board in this matter?
I have.
Plans? Okay. And you are familiar with the zoning ordinance and the master plan of the city of Summit?
I reviewed the zoning ordinance and the master plan. I reviewed the reports of the board professionals. Also had occasion to review the prior approvals that have been discussed as part of this application involving the subject property. I inspected the property on several occasions and also surveyed the adjacent uses as well.
Okay. So then can you just, in a narrative way for the board, describe the study you performed and the conclusions you reached as to the relief sought?
Yeah, so the scope, I think we just covered sort of the scope of my investigation and due diligence. The site itself and the surrounding uses, I think, have been described by others, so I won't sort of belabor that this evening. I know the board is certainly familiar with the site and has heard testimony from several other witnesses as well. And obviously, the board is familiar with the proposal before it this evening, which is essentially the applicant is seeking to consolidate 2 lots, demolish all of the improvements on the commercial lot, and construct a new sanctuary for the church, which will be attached to the existing building on the separate lot. And if this application is approved, the intent is to merge the 2 lots. So let me get right into the issues of zoning compliance. So as the board is aware, the property is split zoned. The entirety of lot 1 is in the R10 zone, and lot 2 is split between the R10 and the B zones. Houses of worship are permitted conditional use in both zones. However, the applicant does not meet all of the express conditions for the use. And again, that is assuming the lots are merged, which would be the intent if this proposal is approved. And therefore, D3 variance relief is being sought. In addition, there are at least 2 C or bulk variances the applicant is seeking. One is for the number of off-street parking spaces, and the other relates to signage. With regard to the planning proofs, this board has obviously heard applications for D3 conditional use variances. There's a certain standard of proof for D3 variances, which is established in what's known as the Coventry versus Westwood case. And in that case, the court essentially opined that an applicant does not need to demonstrate particular suitability for the use on the site, as it is already conditionally permitted there. It's envisioned there. But rather an applicant has to affirmatively demonstrate to the satisfaction of the board that the site can still function consistent with sound planning principles and be able to overcome any problems that may be related to non-compliance with those particular conditional use standards. And as with any D variance application, the negative criteria also has to be satisfied. What is somewhat unique here is that we're dealing with an inherently beneficial use, which is a place of worship. And that calls for a different standard of review, notwithstanding the fact that this is indeed a D3 variance application as opposed to a D1 use variance application. Having said that, what I intend to do this evening is actually cover the use under the seeker standard for inherently beneficial use, but I also want to address the conditional use relief because I think it's important for the record to go through the basis for which we are seeking the relief from the conditional use standard. So what I'd like to do is go through that first and then basically apply the seeker balancing test if I could. So in terms of the conditional use standards not met, minimum lot area. So for a place of worship, the standard under your zoning is 2 acres. The combined lots here would be 0.7 acres. Minimum lot frontage along the Springfield Avenue frontage would be deficient. 200 feet is required. Slightly over 145 feet is being provided. Minimum side yard for a place of worship is a 50-foot standard at our closest point. The setback would be basically a half a foot. Lot coverage, 40% is the maximum. The applicant's proposing 52.3%. The building coverage maximum, again, for place of worship, 15%, 37.2% is being proposed. And the minimum side buffer, and this would be in 2 instances here, the requirement is 20% of the lot width, not to exceed 50 feet. The 2 side buffers would be, again, a half a foot, and the other would be 20 feet, and each of that would be deficient based on the ordinance standard. So I think first in evaluating the conditional use of relief, I think it's important to recognize that the existing church, which, as you heard, received its latest approvals for expansion about 20 years ago, occupies right now about a 0.2 acre lot. And also at the time of that approval, I think it's significant to point out that the zoning board for that expansion 20 years ago granted multiple D variances, a D3, a D4, and a D6, together with as many as 7 C variances. What the applicant is seeking to do now is to include the commercial lot next door and actually increase the lot size by roughly a half acre to accommodate the new sanctuary. So again, just the math, 0.2 acres now with the additional lot in the B zone would basically go to 0.7 acres or an increase of about 1/2 acre. I think this actually will have a positive impact by bringing the church in greater compliance with the D3 zone standards. So in particular, it is increasing, as I mentioned, the lot area. There's an increase in the lot frontage. The applicant is reducing the building coverage. The applicant is significantly reducing the lot coverage. And when I say that, that's in relation to both the existing church property and also looking at existing conditions with regard to the church property and the commercial property combined. The building setbacks on the commercial lot are also being increased. And also the buffer is being increased relative to existing conditions. I think what is of particular importance to me from a planning and impact standpoint, the applicants increasing the building setback on the commercial lot to the closest residential neighbor on Waldron Avenue, and also adding new landscaping, essentially a buffer where virtually little or no buffer exists today, in order to afford protections to that neighbor. Right now, there's basically parking in a very limited, if any, buffer area. I'd also like to point out that I think it's important to recognize that the conditional use standards for houses of worship under the city's ordinance basically apply to what I counted to be about 18 religious institutions throughout the city. And these are of many different sizes, many differences in terms of the ancillary facilities. In fact, based upon what I looked at, I calculated that half of the places of worship do not meet, for example, the 2-acre minimum lot size threshold for a house of worship. And this is, I would also point out that this is not the only place of worship with no off-street parking. The point being is that I don't think there's any one-size-fits-all set of standards that all such institutions can reasonably comply with. Here, I think what we have is an established church on the downtown fringe. It's been part of the neighborhood fabric for many, many years. And while the proposal does not conform to a number of the conditional use standards, I think the expanded site area, as I mentioned, actually brings the use in relatively greater compliance with the ordinance standards. And I think importantly, the proposal before you allows the church to better serve its congregation, as you heard from prior witnesses, while I think at the same time remaining sensitive to the surrounding neighborhood. In that sense, I'd like to talk even now about the parking deficiency. And while that is a C variance as opposed to one of the D3 variances, I think it goes to some extent to the standard of proof under the Coventry Westwood case. And I think the first point to consider is that the church expansion back in 1999 was approved with no off-street parking, similar to what's being sought here this evening. I think at the time, it's safe to say that the zoning board acknowledged that there was sufficient available on-street parking to accommodate the use. The board at the last meeting heard from Ms. Dolan, who indicated that the larger sanctuary will generate greater demand for parking and for on-street parking. As you heard, her analysis indicated that there is indeed a sufficient supply of on-street spaces to handle that increase within the area that she studied, together with nearby municipal parking that may be available on a Sunday morning. I think with that said, I think one of the positive aspects associated with the new sanctuary is that it will enable the church to go from 2 Sunday morning services and an evening service to a single Sunday morning service. And I think that's important from a planning standpoint because it will indeed shorten the time frame where parishioners will use on-street parking on Sundays. And it will also eliminate any overlap that occurs right now between the services, and particularly between the morning services. And I think this will actually have a positive impact on the immediate residential neighbors. So I think bottom line with regard to those conditional use standards, I think accepting the existing context, I believe the proposed expanded use can function properly, and any potential problems associated with the use can indeed be overcome, notwithstanding the nonconformance with the standards. I had indicated that because we're an inherently beneficial use that I would go through the 4-part SECA test, which I know the board is aware of. For an inherently beneficial use, the step 1 is to identify the public interest at stake. And clearly, as I've mentioned, a church is an inherently beneficial use consistent with New Jersey case law. This church, as I mentioned, has historically been part of the neighborhood fabric for many years. The expansion will meet the current needs of the congregation. And with regard to that first step in the seeker test, I would just add that the Religious Land Use and Institutional Persons Act, which we refer to as our LUPA, did establish a principle whereby government is not supposed to impose land use regulations that would essentially impose a substantial burden on religious exercise. Step 2 is identify detrimental impacts. I think what's important here is that, as I indicated early on, both of the zones in which this property is located conditionally permit houses of worship. The point being that houses of worship are contemplated on this property as part of the underlying zone plan, and that includes the portion that is currently within the business zone. And I know there's been some discussion and some interplay with the board in terms of other witnesses and the public. But having said that, I don't believe one can legitimately argue that the removal of the existing commercial building and use, which just so happens to be on the fringe of the B district, would generate adverse land use impact either on the downtown or the master plan or the zone plan. And I really say that understanding that the use is contemplated here. Additionally, as part of the redevelopment of the commercial lot, again, the applicant is increasing the building setback to the adjacent residential lot, adding greenery, adding landscaping, all I think are beneficial basically from a zoning standpoint. I think you also have to bear in mind that with the elimination of the commercial use and the parking lot and the access drive from Springfield Avenue, this will in and of itself, I think, result in a reduction of the overall site intensity. I'm talking about the commercial lot, which depending on the tenant could be, anywhere from a 5 to 7 day a week operation. I think the other thing is that the removal of the existing access curb cut along Springfield Avenue in the B zone, being relatively close to Waldron Avenue or the intersection of Waldron Avenue, is probably not a bad thing from a public safety standpoint. Step 3 is to identify reasonable conditions that may be imposed to mitigate impacts. So I think the applicant has already agreed to or put in place certain measures of safeguards as part of its proposal. And you've heard those from other witnesses. The playground would be suitably secured and screened. I think the fact that the new sanctuary entrance will be from Springfield Avenue is beneficial, again, recognizing that Waldron Avenue is a residential street. You've heard that the trash and recycling will be stored within the building. You've heard that the lighting will all be sensitive, low-level lighting with no spillage in order to basically be respectful of the neighbors. And I think your board planner indicated or made some suggestions with regard to some enhanced landscaping, which the applicant would be more than willing to entertain or agree to as part of this application. And then lastly, and perhaps most importantly, given the nature of the proposal and the variances, the applicant has indicated that it would certainly entertain any condition of approval which would limit simultaneous usage of the existing and proposed new sanctuary for purposes of worship and services. Step 4 is to apply the balancing test. I believe the positives associated with this proposed expansion of an inherently beneficial use substantially outweigh the detriments with the measures in place. So I believe that this zoning board can and should approve the application. And then just finally and briefly, The bulk variances, I think I've already addressed the issue of parking as part of my earlier testimony. With regard to the signage, and this is in relation to the monument sign that's proposed along the Springfield Avenue frontage, relief is sought for the area of the sign and the setback of the sign. And per your ordinance, you're allowed to do 6 square feet of signage area per business or 30 square feet, whichever is less. Now, obviously, we don't have multiple businesses here, so we can't take advantage of the 30 square feet, and we're basically limited to the 6 square feet if you read the ordinance literally. Again, I point out that the basic sign is 24 square feet, and the lettering on the sign is actually under 6 feet. I think it's 5.5 feet. I don't think the sign is obtrusive or egregious. It's not proposed to be illuminated. And with regard to the setback, there's a 25-foot requirement. The applicant's proposing 17 feet. I don't see that as an unreasonable request given the context. And I think our architect also addressed that issue in his testimony. And I think the key here is to try and strike a reasonable balance in terms of an appropriate setback with the need for proper identification purposes. So in the end, I think there's a reasonable basis to grant the relief for the signage as well as for the parking variance. And I think that should cover all of the relief sought. But if I missed something, either the board or its professionals or Roger will remind me, and I'll address that as well if I can.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I have no further questions for Mr. Phillips.
Well done, Mr. Phillips. All right. With that, I think we'll punt to Mr. Kronheim if you'd like first round of questions here.
Thank you. Just a few questions. I'll try to
Thank
keep it. Phillips, you testified that you're familiar with the master plan. Would you consider a shortage of parking to be a key component of Summit's master plan? Or the notation of a shortage of parking to be a oft-repeated theme in that master plan?
I've reviewed the master plan and the most recent re-examination report. If you could be more specific about citing.
Sure, why don't
where and in what context, and I think I can give you a more informed response.
Yeah, absolutely, I can do that. I will share my screen with you. Bear with me 1 second. Share screen. And here we go. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Would you just mind just reading the first sentence here at the beginning, when asked about what downtown Summit needs?
And Mr. Kronheim, sorry, just for everyone's benefit, you just tell us what it is we're looking at for anyone that doesn't seem familiar.
Yes, this is the re-examination of master plan, objective 2.09, and this is page, this would be page 25.
Thank you.
So I think, I don't know if there's anything in particular, but what I'll point out, what I think is important and sort of dovetails with my own testimony is the second paragraph on the left.
So, Mr. Phillips, I had asked you to read the first sentence. Can we start there, and then I promise I'll give you an opportunity to speak.
I'm sorry, I missed that. You'd like me to read?
Yes, just read if you wouldn't mind, just reading the first sentence of this paragraph here that begins, when asked about what downtown Summit needs.
Yes, I read it. Would you like me to read it out loud?
Yes, I'm sorry. Read it aloud, please, for everyone in the meeting.
When asked about what downtown Summit needs, it doesn't take long for residents to cite the difficulty they have finding parking.
So in light of that statement, would you say that concerns about parking are significant in downtown Summit?
Well, I wouldn't read that one statement without reading the full text on this page. And I think that what's most important, and particularly in light of my testimony and particularly my testimony in the parking variance, is I'd look to the second paragraph.
Okay, well,
which says parking supply presents a conundrum in a dense downtown setting such as Summit, where land is limited and valuable, and where parking structures and surface lots don't contribute to the experience of the downtown.
Right, and does this page not also the second sentence of this first paragraph here? And I'll read it aloud for you. While high parking demand is a sign of success, It also poses a constraint on convenience, accessibility, and economic viability of a retail district. Would you agree with that statement from the master plan as it applies to Summit?
I believe that taken that sentence, that whole first paragraph, taken in context with the second paragraph, is kind of the balance that any municipality with a downtown, with basically downtown buildings, street wall buildings without a lot of parking, basically has to cope with and achieve that balance. And very often it is a combination of some off-street parking on individual lots combined with public parking, depending on the particular downtown context.
Let me ask this in the simplest way I possibly can. Is parking difficult in downtown Summit?
I'm not sure this is Mr. Phillips' area of expertise.
He's the planner.
Yeah, but he's not the parking expert. He didn't do a parking study. He listened to the testimony of the parking expert.
That has to do with the particular location of the parking. The question he's testified, it was his testimony that that this furthered the master plan. The master plan says that parking in downtown Summit is a problem. I'm asking him his opinion about that.
So my opinion is as follows, and I can only give you my own personal experience, and I've spent a good deal of time in Summit. At one point in my life, I lived in Summit. I have a general feeling for the parking supply in the community. And essentially, in the downtown area, I've never had a very difficult time at any day or time of the week of finding parking either in a municipal lot or an on-street parking space. That's been my experience. And I think the reason is that there is a combination of on-street parking. Several properties do have their own parking, not a lot, but some do, and the municipal parking. And that's typically the type of parking you find in a downtown context.
Okay, so the residents are wrong in the master plan. We'll move on. Could parking for the business zone be satisfied by a residential zone typically? Is that good planning?
Parking for the business zone for a business property on a residential lot that's not part of the application?
Well, would it be preferable? Part of this application is in the business zone, right? So would it be preferable for the parking to be in the business zone or the residential zone?
Well, I think here the critical component is the use is allowed in each of the zones. So if you look at this property as a whole, theoretically it could be within either of those zones. I certainly wouldn't advocate a commercial use in the downtown providing its parking supply on a residential lot that's either being used as a residence or it would only be used for parking. I wouldn't advocate that.
Isn't that exactly what your application does, though? You have a use in the business zone where all of the parking that Ms. Dolan studied is in a residential neighborhood.
We have a use in both a business zone and a residential zone that has historically had no off-street parking and is basically relied upon through the approval of this board of providing its parking through an on-street supply. And we're seeking to do the same thing as part of this application.
Are there not currently 16 spaces in the business lot, the zone that's in the lot that's in the business zone?
Yeah, but not all those 16 spaces come part and parcel with the place of worship use. And at the time of the approval in 1999, there was absolutely no parking spaces associated with the place of worship.
But now you're removing those 16 spaces from the business zone and having all of the parking be put into the residential zone. Is that correct?
Well, we're not putting any parking on in the residential zone on any lot. What we're seeking to do is continue, again, the approval from 1999, which is to provide for the parking on-street spaces, no different than what occurs today and what is part of the approval.
Let's move along. How does intensifying the peak parking demand in the downtown further the goals of the master plan?
Well, I can't, I mean, you got to point to specific goals of the master plan, but my testimony was that basically what this proposal does is allow the church to go to a single service. And while indeed there's going to be more on-street parking as testified by Ms. Dolan, she's indicated in her testimony that there is a available supply of parking on street to accommodate that demand. But I think the critical thing here is the reduction in the services from as many as 3 services to 1, and the impacts of the turnover of that parking over a lengthy period of time being reduced to a limited service on a Sunday morning. I think that has less of an impact on the neighbors.
But you would agree with Ms. Dolan that the peak of that use is now higher.
Well, certainly during that peak 1 service, there will be, assuming that that you can fill that sanctuary, yes, there will be more on-street parking, but according to Ms. Dolan's survey, that on-street parking is available.
Okay, no further questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kronheim. All right, let's take questions from,
Unshare the screen.
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Galvin. So let's take some questions from our board professionals. Mr. Snickus, is there anything you want to follow up with there?
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Phillips, just regarding some of your testimony, I just wanted to clarify a few things. You had talked about, and I think you lightly touched on it, that under our LUPA, the criteria that a board or a municipality imposes on a religious institution can have a substantial impact or burden on the practice of that religious institution. That's not to infer that the parking requirement is a substantial burden at this point. Was that any way in your thought or what you're providing in your direct testimony?
No, I wasn't in particular addressing just the issue of the parking variance sought when I said that. Basically, in terms of the entirety of the application, in terms of both the site plan being sought and all the associated variance relief, I think it needs to be viewed as a whole. And I think that's the way I approached it in terms of looking not just at the parking, but with regard to the conditional use relief and the C variance relief we're seeking as well. So in essence, I've reviewed it and I've come to a conclusion as a package, if you will.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that for the board. In addition to that, you talked about under the SECA test, the reasonable conditions that can be imposed on the applicant. You touched on a number of the conditions that I think were addressed. Although one of the ones that I thought was the most important was, as you had just provided in some of your cross-examination discussion, was the issue of the reduction in service on the Sunday. I believe that's part of the application as a condition, if I'm not mistaken. Is that true?
I'm going to defer to Roger, but
Yeah.
certainly that's part of the testimony. And I just can't recall, to be honest, if it was offered as a condition, but it's clearly part of the testimony.
Yes, it was offered as a condition. The sense of the condition that the church was offering was that there be no simultaneous large public services. So while Sunday service would be going on in the new sanctuary, there would not be a simultaneous full-blown Sunday service in the old sanctuary or a wedding or a concert or a funeral. It's not to say the door to that's going to be locked, because as Reverend Bogus testified, we sometimes break out our youth who would otherwise be in the large family service and have a separate small service for them. And there might be 15 young people in the old sanctuary while the main service was going on. But that was the sense of what we were proposing.
Okay, but just to clarify that further, you wouldn't be looking for another full service on a Sunday. I think that's some of the
Absolutely.
basis of the testimony that's been provided.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
Guys, I think that we can have a condition that's appropriate that says that the what'd you call it, Raj? The church, the where they're going to have their services. What's that called?
The main sanctuary, the new
The
sanctuary.
main sanctuary.
Yeah,
That we're not going to operate this main sanctuary with the hall simultaneously.
correct. We might have some small group in the old sanctuary,
Yeah, I got it.
not a full service.
Belt and suspenders, right? So, but what I'm saying is, once we start, I think that is a fair condition, and that's not putting any limitation on religion.
Now, we proposed that condition. Yeah,
What's that?
we proposed that condition going in.
I understand, and I'm agreeing with it. I'm saying, I know that some of the testimony has been that one of the benefits that we're being offered is that instead of having 2 services, we're going to have 1 service, and therefore it's going to occur at one time. But I think we're on a slippery slope when we start saying, no, you can't have a second service. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. And that might trigger a RLUIPA claim that we don't want to be involved with. Okay, so, but I would expect that the church will honor what their testimony is here.
Yes.
And I need more clarification on enhanced landscaping. And I also heard that the sign is not to be illuminated. Though I only had 3 conditions at this point.
Yes, the sign is not to be illuminated. That's correct. Landscaping, I know that we had met with the forester and gone back and added more plantings to his satisfaction, and he approved the the revised landscape plan that we submitted.
We can do that as submitted, a revised landscaping plans to be submitted to Mr. Linson for his review and approval. We do that all the time.
Yeah, I think we did that already, but that's.
Yeah, but you're doing, one of the things that you're looking at in the secret balancing test is you don't want to strip that out, because when you apply the secret balancing test, we're supposed to also take into consideration the conditions of approval. So you're enhancing the site by the condition. So I think we should allow that to remain that way. And,
I don't think that's going to be a problem one way or the other.
Mr. Galvin,
So I don't want to speak for the board's planner, but one of the things that I know he brought up at the last meeting was, since we will be setting the sanctuary further back than the existing commercial building on the lot, we'd be sort of exposing more of the blank wall of the immediately adjacent commercial building. And I think he asked if we'd be willing to do some plantings along that property line to soften it. And I think we agreed to do that, but Ed can speak for himself.
thank you, Mr. Phillips. It's exactly what I was just going to bring up.
And that's no problem.
Yeah.
We would agree to that.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Phillips has covered the rest of the testimony appropriately, and that's all the questions I have.
Okay. And just before we shift over to Mr. Dower for any questions he might have, Mr. Galvin, is a condition also approval and acceptance of the engineer's letter? Is that also on your list?
Yeah, but I didn't consider that. We're talking about the secret balancing test, and yes, I will also include the engineer letter.
Okay. Just as a matter of form more than anything.
No, I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Mr. Dower, what do you got? Anything?
I have actually, Mr. Chairman, I have no questions for the planner at this time. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Questions then from the board to the planner. Any members have questions?
And you're all on mute.
That's right. I'll jump off at once. No questions. All right. I'm going to pause for a moment. All right. No questions from the board members then here for the planner. Then we'll take questions from the public, any member of the interested public. This is just questions, no commentary on the application, just questions, ideally for the planner at this time.
I raised my hand, but I don't know if you recognize that or I need to just yell.
You yelled and I heard you. So if you'll just give us your name, your address, and then we'll welcome you.
My name is Nancy Adams. I'm the director of Summit Downtown, Inc. I don't live in Summit, but I'm representing the board of Summit Downtown that has concerns about this application. So I'd like to ask the planner, when you spoke about your personal experience in finding parking in downtown Summit, was that your professional planning testimony, or was that because I believe Mr. Kronheim asked you questions about the master plan and its citation of the lack of parking in downtown Summit, which the SDI agrees with. So I'm asking about your testimony with regard to that, because I only heard your personal experience of not having difficulty finding a parking space, but I didn't hear any professional expertise.
So I, as you are well aware, because you were at the last meeting, am not the parking expert in this matter. We had a separate, Ms. Dolan conducted a separate parking study, and her focus was on the adequacy of the parking to serve this particular use and proposal. and to provide support for the variance we're seeking for parking. I think Mr. Kronheim pointed to me some generic language in the master plan with regard to parking. And his follow-up was, do you feel that there's sufficient parking? Having not been the particular parking expert that studied this as part of this proposal, I can only give the benefit of my personal experience in terms of the ability to find parking in downtown Summit. And that's what I did.
Okay. Interesting choice. Okay, so the other question I had for you was that the sanctuary was only going to be used for one service on Sundays, and that it would limit, am I to understand that the sanctuary will not be used the other 6 days of the week? That this will only be used for a combination of combining the existing services to be one service on Sunday mornings, and so it will never be used the rest of the week?
I don't think that that was the intent or the testimony. I think the issue with the Sunday morning relates to the peak period of demand on a regular basis, which really would be the Sunday service timeframe. And that was the basis for Ms. Dolan doing the parking study, basically covering that critical Sunday morning. That's not to say that the sanctuary could not be used on some other day, as was testified to by other witnesses, for an event such as a wedding or so forth.
So I guess my question would be then, as a planner, what your professional testimony would be with regard to the use of a 400 extra seats sanctuary in the downtown on other days of the week besides Sundays, and what impact that might have on the conduction of business in downtown Summit and the 200 businesses that are down there, and the use of some such large facility with regard to another day of the week when other places are trying to conduct business downtown.
So was that a statement or a question? I'm not sure the question.
I was asking your as a planner, what your opinion is, your professional opinion under oath would be to have such a facility with no parking being, given to it on its own, and what impact that might have on the businesses downtown and their ability to conduct business with already limited parking.
So again, and Ms. Dolan may be the better expert, but I'm going to rely in part on her testimony. There would be at any event at the church, the bulk of the parking would continue to be sought on street. That's not to say, as you've heard, that some people might not also use some municipal parking spaces, but I think ultimately people are going to look for parking that's the most convenient to the facility. And there may be at times, not a lot of times, but there may be times over the course of the year that people that are attending the church for an event may also have to compete for some parking with downtown shoppers. That's not at all unusual in a context basically where you have buildings, not only the church building, but many commercial buildings in the downtown that don't have their own parking. That's what makes a downtown.
So, and my last question would be with regard to your comment that government shouldn't limit through zoning religious activities. So there's an existing sanctuary there, an existing church that has never been limited before. So are you saying that government and zoning cannot limit expansion of such services, even though the church has been in existence for a long time and it's not being restricted right now by government?
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm doing is essentially citing our LUPA, which says that government should not impose a substantial burden on religious exercise. And I'm just indicating that as part of the seeker test, this board should take that into account in weighing all the testimony that's been provided vis-a-vis this particular application. And as you well know, each matter or case will stand or fall on the merits, but it's important in reviewing a application involving a place of worship that the federal government has essentially put in place our LUPA, which basically gives the municipality another burden to basically have to address and comply with as part of these kinds of applications.
Okay, so the government hasn't been restricting that use thus far. So
I'm not suggesting that at all. Again, I'm saying that given our LUPA, that the board needs to take that into account in weighing any application that involves a place of worship.
Okay. One last question, I'm sorry, it's only generated from your response. So do you have an idea of how many of the church's parishioners, if you will, like people who go to this church are Summit residents, and what percentage comes from out of town?
That's not an appropriate question.
Why not?
Goes to people's civil rights. Why does it make a difference? Inherently beneficial uses supply benefit
It
to
makes
the surrounding region, including where you live.
It makes a difference, Mr. Galvin, in that
That's
it
the question, but
impacts
it doesn't
the number
have to
of
answer the
people
question.
coming from out of
It does
town.
not have to answer the question.
Okay,
You can't talk one at a time because it won't be on the
I
record.
can, because I'm the lawyer for the board.
yes, you are.
Phillips, if you care to answer, you can, but otherwise, I think we can move to the next member.
Well, as in listening to the earlier testimony, I think it was stated that the church has parishioners from a variety of surrounding communities as well as within Summit. And as I recall from that first hearing, Mr. Galvin interjected at that time when there was kind of some follow-up being sought. So I would concur with Mr. Galvin. And clearly this place of worship has parishioners that go beyond the limits of the city of Summit. Not unusual for a place of worship.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Other members of the public that would like to ask a question of the applicant's planner, you can raise your hand on video or ideally using the function here in Zoom. These are again questions for the applicant's planner. Or you can speak up like Ms. Adams did as well. That's another way to break through if you'd like. All right, I'm scanning through. I don't see any further questions.
Why don't you put your hand up if you're interested in speaking? If we don't see any hands up, we're good.
Yep, one last chance, one last scan through. All right, okay, excellent. So with that, it is 8:22. So I'm just trying to look at timing here, Mr. Maynard. I suspect we're going to have a fair amount of public comment coming through here. So if at some point, let's just kind of keep a pulse on that. I'm happy to kind of continue to press on here unless any other members of the board.
What's our break time, Steve?
Well, we're going to break from this case at 9:30.
So unless anyone from the board needs a break right now, let's keep moving.
Let's just keep going and let's get, so this is now the time. No, Mr. Maynard, do you have any further witnesses?
No, that's our case in chief, Mr. Chairman. I just reserve the right to recall the witness or anything in rebuttal to what the objectors present. But failing that, yes, we have put our case in. Thank you.
So where's Mr. Cronheim? Do you have a case to put in?
Yes, we do, Mr. Galvin.
That's all right. It's your turn.
Okay. I'd like to call my first witness. I'd like to call Mr. Daniel Cronheim to the stand. Everybody, hopefully this will work for, is this sufficient visual for everybody there? Mr. Galvin, does that work for you?
Yeah, we can see him. Raise your right hand. I don't know if we can hear him, but we can see him. Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
State
Please.
your name for the record, spell your last name.
Daniel Cronheim, Cronheim.
All right. Our court reporter, can you hear him well?
Right now I can.
All right, please proceed.
Great. Okay, and would you state your qualifications for the record?
Yes, I'm a graduate of Princeton University, St. John's Law School. 34 years on the zoning board of the Borough of Watchung, 25 years as its chairman continually. And I am a member of the Institute of Real Estate Management, of which I was the New Jersey president. And I am a CPM from the Institute of Real Estate Management.
Explain what a CPM is.
Certified Property Manager. And I head our company, which manages the adjacent property. That is the property directly to the west of the former funeral home, all the way to Summit Avenue. That represents the properties owned by Burling and by RBP. I also would say that I'm also the secretary of the Land Use Committee of the New Jersey State Bar Association and regularly teach land use for the Bar Association's continuing education courses, including ethics. And I manage this property for our company, and I receive oral and written reports on a regular basis from our staff as to this property, as well as my own personal opinions and being at the property.
We're seeking to have him qualified as an expert in the field of property management. Any objection?
I don't have an objection.
We heard testimony from the applicant's planner that parking is not an issue in downtown Summit. Would you agree with that assessment?
No, that's not even close to the real world. It's
Time out for a second. Time out for a second.
Yep.
Mr. Spur, do you accept his credentials?
I'll accept his credentials, yes.
All right, you may proceed.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Cronin.
yes.
Let me repeat the question. We heard testimony that parking is not a problem in downtown Summit. Do you agree with that assessment?
No, it's not even close. As the property which I manage for our company and for the tenants of our company and for the people who shop with our tenants, we have 100+ parking spaces for the center, but I know there's a problem here because one of the problems we have, we as a result of this shortage of parking, we have spent $100,000 plus each year to control and manage the parking that exists behind these stores and restaurants and tenants.
And why do you? Why is it necessary, in your opinion, to spend that money to manage the lot?
Because there's no other way to guarantee that there's space for the tenants to park, and there's no other way for the public to go have a place to park. So, as with that, we do a very serious job with 4 or 5 people who work at the site throughout the week, and we have the ability to control this and try to control what's in this lot.
Can you talk for a minute about the extent of the parking management and control measures that are necessary in order to manage the lot?
Certainly, we have a house going into the site, but we have usually 2 people on site. They double park the space behind the stores that are directly face Springfield Avenue, and we have a garage rental that has some of the tenants actually rent garage space to make more space available for the public. And
is parking a concern for the tenants?
Oh, absolutely, because we double park their cars up against the stores, and as I said, they take out garage space.
By their cars, you mean the employees of the tenants?
The employees of the tenants, because there's really no other way to do it, and it's important to these people. And we managed to keep the entire parking space really managed, have to control who comes in, comes out, to make sure that they're using the stores that we represent. In fact, there are residential tenants in this project, in this parking lot, and they do not park behind the stores. They park away from the stores at all times.
Do you find that, has it been your experience that you receive sort of general downtown Summit shopping traffic that you have to control and keep out of that lot because the other lots are full?
There's no question this lot is free. So therefore that the lots in town that are not free are not as desirable.
No further questions.
I have one or two questions for Mr. Kronheim.
Certainly.
Mr. Kronheim, I understand your testimony to be is that you need to spend money to control the parking that you own. Is that correct?
We manage this property for the owners of the property.
Okay. And there's also street parking, public street parking in the area around these properties. Is that correct? Is that correct or not?
No.
There's no
It's
metered parking in front of these properties?
Only in front of Springfield.
Okay. And who owns that street parking?
But the public owns the street parking.
Correct. Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. I'd like to call my next witness, Mr. Simo. Yeah, why don't you, do you want to join? Do you want to try that? Did that work pretty well for everyone on the board?
That was pretty well, Mr. Conway. If we could
I
just
did
pause
have
for a
one
moment.
question.
I just want to make sure that the
One
board
part,
has
yes.
an opportunity to
I
ask questions of the witnesses. So,
apologize.
Mr. Mullen, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to get a sense because I often use that lot. And I was wondering if there were any times where the intensity of the use of that lot was greater than others. And I'd also like to understand, what the intensity of the use is on Sunday mornings, because I think, definitely a few of those businesses are not open on Sunday mornings.
I am not particularly concerned about that because we have residents that live there and park on Sundays. We have stores and restaurants that are open, and it's not public parking. It's limited to the stores involved.
Okay, I don't think you directly addressed what I was getting at. I want to understand, the peak periods of intensity of use of your lots effectively.
Every day is different. And at this time of year, as we approach Christmas, things are different again. But it's hard to say what every day, every minute is, because it's hard to know.
Well, I mean, you manage the property and sort of
Correct.
took issue with prior statements, so I figured you'd be in the best position to know that, right?
Well, the question is, in this era right now, I cannot say that everybody is going out. The restaurants are going out because the governor has banned it. So I can't say what it's going to be.
Okay, thank you.
Questions from members of the board for this witness? Mr. Lickitz? Sorry, he beat you to it, Catherine. Sorry.
Forget about the renovation.
Scott, you're breaking up, kid.
We can't hear
I
him.
can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
No, somehow you got some feedback loop.
Sorry. Is it okay now?
Better.
Go ahead, ask your question. We'll see what we can do.
Mr. Kronheim, if the Unitarian Church went away tomorrow, would you no longer need attendance for your parking lot?
No. We would not. We would still need attendance at all times.
Do you know of any municipalities in New Jersey of a similar size to Summit that do not have a downtown parking problem?
Yes.
Really? Which one?
Yes. I was on the Special Improvement District board for Red Bank, and we solved the parking problem. In part by parking in all the church lots and paved them, and that's where they all came from. And we also included the Catholic high school that used those lots as well and got them out of the municipal lots. It is one of the success stories of all the Urban Land Institute. They've been written up quite a bit.
Any further questions, Mr. Lickitz, for this witness? All right, Ms. Schwartzstein, if you'd like, you had a question?
Yes, I had a question. Hi, Mr. Kronheim. My question was, are you aware, have you been aware of members of the church attempting to park in that lot at any time?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, do you know how often that happens?
The staff has informed me that it happens on a regular basis because the church, it usually during the week, because that's when most of the people come to the church because the church operates 7 days a week. So I'm a little confused about why only Sunday is being talked about.
Right, just to follow up on that. So you've been advised by the parking attendants that people are attempting to park in that lot to go to the church, not just on Sundays, but other days of the week.
Yes, ma'am.
And do you know, but it's also happening on Sundays, or you're unaware whether it's happening on Sundays?
I've seen people park not for our tenants on Sundays, but not lately because it's different. I'm not going out to look at church parking lots on this time of year.
Okay, thank you.
Just following up on that, what other businesses do you get customers attempting to park in your lot from? Is it exclusively a church problem, or do you get, like, say, Hilltop Bicycles, same thing? Well, they have a parking lot, so never mind them, but you get where I'm going.
Most of the people who park in our lots, some people will pretend they're going to one of the restaurants and go someplace else. And the people who work there do a pretty good judge of that kind of thing. But people will try.
Well, I might have been guilty of that once or twice, so my apologies.
You will not be unique.
Any other questions from members of the board? Liz, I saw you jump off of mute at least once there, but.
I did, but I think they've already answered the question.
Okay. Mr. Goblin, does the public have an opportunity to ask questions of these witnesses?
They could. Does anybody have any great desire to do that? I usually don't. Yes. Well, right now.
Just procedurally, there's just a question for you.
This is Mr. Kronheim's case, so they could. This is what if it was a plan? What if Mr. Kronheim was a planner? I'd say yes. Yeah, you can ask if any of the public has a question to this witness.
All right, now I'm going to ask that question. Does any member of the public have a question for this witness? Don't everybody jump out at once. All right, Mr. Kronheim, David Kronheim, you may proceed.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to call my next witness, Hal Simoff.
Good evening.
Al, raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony about the giving this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Would you please state your qualifications for the record?
Well, we'll do this. Al, what are you? What's your professional background? What's your professional?
I am a professional engineer and a professional planner, licensed in both aspects.
All right. Provide us 3 boards that you've appeared before recently and do not include Summit.
Well, I've been for 25 years, I've been on the Bernardsville Planning Board as a member. Where was I last week? Rochelle Park, Clifton. Basically, I've been out for the last 30 years, 2 to 3 nights a week.
Mr. Chairman, do you accept his credentials?
We will. Yep. Michelle, did you have a question?
Yeah, spell his name, please.
SIMOFF.
Do it again.
SIMOFF. And my address is 2 Shunpike Road, Madison, New Jersey.
Thank you.
Okay. Please proceed, Mr. Kronheim.
Just to clarify, we're accepting his credentials as a planner and a traffic engineer. Is that acceptable?
Accepting him as a planner, traffic engineer, could you give us a little bit more texture to that?
I'm a fellow with the Institute of Transportation Engineers. In fact, I taught traffic engineering at NJIT. I'm a graduate civil engineer, and I've been qualified in the Superior Court as a professional engineer, as well as virtually every planning board from Cape May to Bergen County. I travel the Parkway.
Mr. Mayor, are you okay?
I am.
All right, let's proceed.
Okay. Are you familiar with the site in question?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and you've had a chance to review the application
Yes,
and the physical conditions of the surrounding areas?
yes.
And if approved, would the applicant's plan increase or decrease the number of spaces on site?
Decrease, obviously.
Decrease. Okay, and what would the loss be? How many spaces?
16 spaces would be taken from the count.
Okay.
In the neighborhood.
You've also had a chance to review the master plan of the city of Summit, the 2016 reexamination.
Yes, November 2016.
Okay, and in particular the parking sections.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to make reference to the document I showed before, the section 2.09 to the applicant's planner. In your professional opinion, does this plan substantially impair the goals of the master plan?
Yes, the goals suggest that parking is a problem in the downtown area. It also suggests that parking inventory should be studied as part of any application that's requesting parking variances. It's right there on the right side of the sheet. Mm-hmm. And so I'm making the argument that that this application is inconsistent with the master plan.
Okay, and why exactly do you think it's inconsistent with the master plan?
Obviously, because of the fact that there's a parking requirement of 200 parking spaces for this site, and there are 0 being provided.
Okay. Have you had a chance to review the parking study by Ms. Dolan of Dolan and Dean?
Yes.
Okay. Do you believe that the study accurately depicts the conditions in the area?
No.
And can you explain to the board why you don't think the study is accurate?
Well, I'd like to go to figure 3 of the
Sure.
Dolan and Dean.
If you just bear with me 1 second, I'll put that on the screen for us. Okay. Okay, and then I'm going to share the screen. Okay, right here. All right, this is the from the applicants from the application. Correct? Can you see that? Everybody see that?
Let me move over.
Okay, want to look at the screen? Sorry, technology. Okay. And so what about this this parking study is either inaccurate or incomplete?
Well, the first issue is the Waldron Avenue parking inventory is half of what is noted on the total spaces. There's parking only allowed on one side of the street.
So roughly how many spaces were eliminated?
36.
Okay. And do you believe it was Ms. Dolan's testimony that the parking requirement was 134 total spaces? Do you think that she has accurately and correctly calculated the parking requirement?
No, this is a new application. So there's approximately 600 seats in the 2 sanctuaries, and therefore the requirement would be 1 per 3 seats, 1 space per 3 seats, which would require 200 parking spaces.
And in specific, does the ordinance speak to whether that parking must be on street or off street?
Off street.
Okay. And how many off street spaces is the applicant providing?
0.
So where is all the parking going?
It all has to be found on the streets surrounding the site.
Okay. Let's shift gears and discuss the proximity of the parking in this study to the site. In your professional opinion, what's a reasonable distance for someone to walk for this sort of 1 to 1.5 hour visit to the church?
Right, because if there would be different times if we were talking about an office use where the people would spend 8 or 10 hours in the building. But here the people or the visitors would spend an hour and a half at the site. So that lessens the required the required walking distance. And my studies and my beliefs are that a reasonable walking distance is 500 feet.
Okay, and approximately what's the maximum distance shown as a parking space in Ms. Dolan's city? How far would someone have to walk to be kind of at maximum?
Well, in her testimony, I think she stated 1,500 feet, and that's about more than a quarter of a mile.
Quarter mile. Okay, so that basically triple what you would consider to be a reasonable distance for someone to walk.
Yes.
Okay.
Especially when you have no handicapped access, no handicapped parking. So people with wheelchairs and people that are on crutches and that kind of thing, having them to travel 1,500 feet is a real hardship.
And so can you explain to the board a little bit, what effect does it have, including those spaces that are very far flung in the overall parking count?
Well, the other issue is that if you're short this significant parking demand, it increases the traffic circulating in the neighborhood. Because first, maybe you check out the 36 spaces on Waldron, and if you don't find them there, then you'll go to some of the other spaces or look for other spaces on the south side of Springfield Avenue. So what ends up happening is those parking maneuvers take 2 or 3 passes by the church before they might find a parking space, because you're obviously going to look for parking closest to the building and then branch out and go further away.
And do you think it's reasonable to count these spaces that are 1,500 feet away? Is that a legitimate space to count in a parking count?
In my opinion, no.
Okay. Let's go to call your attention back to the chart that's on the screen here. This is again Ms. Dolan's figure 3, and in specific, I'm going to draw your attention to the counts from September 23rd and October 21st, 2018. Which areas did Ms. Dolan initially study?
Well, Waldron, the Forest Avenue parking lot, Springfield Avenue between Irvington Place and Hobart Avenue, and Irvington Place between Springfield and Franklin Place. Basically, approximately a block or 2 from the site.
And how would you characterize those areas?
Well, except for Irving Place, Irving Place and Waldron, they're all commercial.
And are they, did you mean commercial or do you mean residential streets?
Well, the Forest Avenue parking lot is commercial and Springfield is commercial.
Okay, thanks. And then looking down to the counts that were done on Hobart, DeBarry, Ruthven, and Franklin places in the subsequent dates, are those areas closer to the church or are they farther from the church?
They are farther. It appears that when they found no parking near the site, they expanded their study in 2019 to look for more parking.
So when the count resumed on January 27th, 2019, just to be clear, did the area that was being studied change from the 2018 counts?
Yes.
Okay. And in this larger area, how many spaces did, I'm going to scroll this down a little bit so you can actually see the numbers here. In this larger area, how many spaces did Ms. Dolan count as available?
92, 97, and 82.
Okay. And do you agree with that assessment that those are actually the number of spaces that are available today?
No, because Waldron only has half the supply and they've all been taken. So if you subtract the 36 parking spaces from the total, these numbers come down into the 60s.
Okay. And to add to that, was it your testimony earlier that some of these spaces are really too far to be counted as reasonable parking?
Yes.
Okay.
And then some of them, like the ones on Hobart, Hobart is a 30-foot wide street. So, and it is also a collector road because it has direct access to Route 24, and therefore parking on 2 sides of a 30-foot wide street is a safety hazard that was addressed by the council when they removed parking on one side of Waldron.
Okay, so we'll circle back on that in just one second. I'm going to change the exhibit here for just one moment. And I'm going to okay. I'm going to put up, I guess we need to mark this as objectors 1 for today, or I'm sorry, I've lost track of where we are. Mr. Galvin, do you have a count on which exhibit this would be?
We're going to check on it.
Okay.
Chris, what do you got?
Going back to the transcript, I'll let you
know. No problem. No problem.
Well, you know what we'll do? Did you mark anything else that was an O exhibit, Dave?
I believe we marked one in the 1 or 2 in the first meeting. Yeah, the outside.
So start with 10.
Okay.
Start with 10. We're fine. You didn't get to 10.
No, we certainly didn't get to 10. Do you recognize this chart?
Yes.
Okay.
I reviewed it as it was being prepared.
Okay. So let's talk me through this chart a little bit and kind of what the notations mean.
Well, first of all, we took 36 parking spaces out of the inventory because of the council determining that the 2-sided parking on Waldron was a safety hazard. And I would And then so virtually all the parking that's being satisfied is on the Hobart Avenue between DeBarry and Springfield Avenue, which again is a 30-foot wide street. But if you can see the chart, with 35 spaces, there were no cars parked there on 11/27/19. There were only 5 cars parked there on the September count in 19, and there were just 3 cars parked there on the October 20th count.
So walk me through then the bottom line numbers here. We'll look at January 27, 2019, and the 2 columns to the right of that, September 29th, October 20th, 2019. With removing those 36 cars from the side of Waldron, what are the total number of available spaces then at that point with the Waldron spaces now removed?
Well, 56, 61, and 46.
Okay, and how many spaces did Ms. Dolan assert in her report were necessary for how many additional spaces required, even under her 134 space count?
It was approximately 80 some spaces.
Yeah. Okay. And then under the, I'm going to draw your attention to the bottom left here of the chart. And with the if the 200 space requirement is utilized, how many additional spaces are required and how many spaces short is the
Well,
church?
based on the zoning, there would be 130 parking spaces required. And this, if you take out the Waldron parking spaces, it ends up being 93 spaces deficient.
Okay. And with the spaces removed on Waldron, where would you think is the most likely place for people to go park?
On the residential streets south of Springfield Avenue. But as you can see, on Irving Place, there were only 2 or 4 spaces. On DeBarry Street, north of Springfield Avenue, there were about 11 or 16 spaces. And on Reuben, there were approximately 10. So those numbers are very small, but the main credit that she's asking for is the 35 spaces on Hobart. And I'm stating that that would become a hazard for two-way traffic.
So, and currently Hobart allows parking on both sides of the street or
Yes,
one side?
It's a 30-foot wide street that allows parking on both sides.
And 30 feet, is that the same width as Waldron Avenue?
Yes.
In your professional opinion, would the condition that existed on Waldron Avenue that led to the ordinance banning parking on that side of the street, would that condition also exist on Hobart Avenue?
Yes, because when you take away 16 feet for parking on 2 sides, an 8-foot lane on each side for parking, then you're down to 14 feet for two-way traffic, which is an impossibility.
Can you explain why that's, well, let me ask you, is that dangerous?
Yes, because a lane is between 10 and 12 feet wide. So you need 20 to 22 feet for two-way traffic. And when you only have 16 feet, it's a problem. 14 feet or 16 feet, it's a problem.
And why is it a problem? What can you explain to the board what kind of dangerous conditions this would create?
You can't get two-way traffic to flow.
So it's difficult for cars to pass?
It's impossible.
Visibility, is visibility impaired from people pulling out of their driveways with cars on both sides of the street?
Of course.
Let's talk a little bit about pickup, drop-off, and circulation. How efficiently do you think that will function at peak times?
Well, again, it would create double moves. If you have somebody you want to drop off, they would drop off and then the car would circulate looking for a parking space. If you have somebody that parks at a distant 1,500 feet away and has a wheelchair or crutches, then that's a very difficult maneuver for people to walk that distance or travel by wheelchair.
And how about if somebody's being dropped? We've heard testimony the new entrance will be on Springfield Avenue as opposed to on Waldron. So if someone's being dropped off in front of Springfield Avenue, what effect is that going to have on traffic on Springfield Avenue?
Well, if there's parking on Springfield Avenue on the north side of the street, those cars would have to double park, and that would restrict through traffic in the one lane that now it exists on Springfield Avenue in the westbound direction.
Okay. And did Ms. Dolan's report address that concern at all? No.
I didn't see it.
Okay. And I'm going to call your attention back to the chart here. We've got these question marks around these counts. Is Ms. Dolan's count in any way reflective of the current situation? Did she study the current conditions on any of these days within that box?
No.
How would you characterize the intensity of the park? How would you characterize assuming the application is approved, how would you characterize the intensity of parking at peak demand?
It's very intense because number one, people show up for a 10 or 11 o'clock service. They show up, not too long before, and they disperse not too long after the end of the service.
And we've heard testimony from the applicant's parking expert that parking will be mainly in residential neighborhoods. Is that correct? Is that how you read this chart?
Well, yes.
Okay. Is that level of intensity of parking consistent with the residential neighborhood?
No, the intention of the residential streets is to serve the residential uses. And then, so that by adding a significant parking demand in front of these quality residential uses, just degrades the residential character of the neighborhood.
Would you consider that to be a negative impact?
Yes.
And what percentage of the parking would be borne by the neighborhood in the downtown?
Well, as you see, the Springfield Avenue has 0 parking available. And then
would it be a large portion? Would it be almost all of it? Would it be none of it? How would you characterize it?
Virtually none of it is in the business district.
Okay.
Except the parking on Springfield Avenue, and based on that study and based on Ms. Dolan's studies, there were 0 parking available.
And is there, in addition to the Sundays, which are studied here in this report, are there uses every day?
Oh, yes. The downtown is a thriving business district, and it has a parking demand on Springfield, on Summit, on all the surrounding streets.
Okay. And just to clarify, which days and times did Ms. Dolan study?
Just Sunday at 11 o'clock.
Roughly how long of a window did she study?
Her study was just to study the overlap between the 2 services.
Okay. Did Ms. Dolan study any other days or times?
No.
Okay. We've heard testimony that the applicant intends to use the building every day. Does the applicant study include any evidence of what impacts it would those other times, other than the 1 hour window on Sunday, would have on the downtown or the residential neighborhood?
No.
Okay. What would you say in a downtown like Summit? What could you talk a little bit about? What are some of the peak times for demand in the downtown?
Well, clearly Saturday is a peak shopping time, and if this use was having weddings or funerals on a Saturday, it would compound the existing parking in the downtown area.
Okay. And I'm glad you mentioned weddings. We've heard that the church does Saturday afternoon. We've heard testimony that the church does Saturday afternoon weddings. What would the effect be of a large on the neighborhood and the downtown of a large wedding, up to a 400-person wedding on a Saturday afternoon or early evening in the downtown?
About 130 parking spaces.
How would that affect businesses and shops downtown?
Oh, it would infringe on the parking downtown.
And we heard testimony from the applicant's planner that any interference with or competition for parking with shoppers and with other utilizers of the downtown would be, I'll paraphrase, somewhat sporadic, not consistent. Do you feel that that's an accurate assessment?
Well, what happens is when you have a 400-seat sanctuary, you increase your market for funerals and weddings, because now the 200-seat sanctuary is not adequate. And then, conceivably, the use would have more. The sanctuary would have more usage because it's a greater supply of seats.
And does the application contain any condition that would limit uses on other days?
No.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit also. I know we talked about weddings, and I will get to the end here quickly. Let's talk about memorial services. What the church testified that would happen on any day of the week. So, what would a 400-person memorial service on a random weekday? How would that affect the area, the downtown, and the neighborhood?
Again, it would add approximately 135 parking space demand to the neighborhood.
And do you think that would cause stress to the parking downtown?
Yes, and it's reinforced by the fact that the parking is deficient on Sundays. If it's deficient on Sundays, it's surely going to be deficient during the week.
I want to ask you one final question. After reviewing the application, if the board were to approve this plan, what would the impact be on the downtown and the neighborhood?
It would be significant. The other thing that I heard in tonight's testimony is that there's no restriction on the overlap of in the future of overlap of services. Right now they have an overlap of services because the congregation has been in place for 100 or so years. And we're not talking about the next 2, 3, 5 years. This approval will go with the use of the building forever. And that there could be a conceivable overlap of services if the congregation increases. And this application is based on no increase in usage, when in reality, who can tell what would happen in the next 100 years use of the building?
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Any questions from members of the board?
Well, I have a few.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Maynard, go for it.
I have a few, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Mr. Simoff, did you watch Ms. Dolan's testimony?
Yes.
Okay. Would it refresh your recollection that she covered in her testimony the fact that parking on Waldron was only allowed on one side of the street?
But that's not consistent with, she said that.
Did she cover that in her testimony? Yes or
repeated
no?
it.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you. Did she also state that the radius for walking that she considered reasonable was 1,000 feet, not 1,500?
I thought I heard 1,500, but in any event, the studies that I've seen suggest that 500 is a reasonable number.
Okay. Well, her testimony was 1,000 feet. Are you aware that there are no changes proposed in the usage of this church during the week? No new programs, no new anything in connection with this application. Are you aware of that?
That was the statement, but I don't think that what we were just
Well,
heard
I'm just asking a simple question. Were you aware that that was the testimony of the church, that they were not changing any of their weekday operations if this project is built?
That's what I heard.
Okay. And are you aware that the conditions in the 1999 approvals, which the church has proposed would continue in place, and I'm sure the board will insist on, does contain certain controls on what can happen there during the week that would affect traffic and parking during the week? Specifically, has a restriction against running a nursery or day school, which would be a huge traffic generator. So were you aware of that at all?
Yes.
Okay. And did you watch the testimony of Reverend Bogus, who was the first witness?
Yes.
Okay. And were you aware of what she testified to as the frequency of funerals and weddings, which is not a great frequency for this relatively small congregation?
Yes, with a 200-seat sanctuary.
Right. And in your opinion, who would be the city agency would most normally comment on a zoning application as to parking or traffic issues?
I'm not sure.
Would the police department typically weigh in on such issues?
The police was your question?
Would the police department typically be the municipal agency that would weigh in on traffic and parking issues?
Sometimes. I'm not.
Are you aware that the police in Summit had no comment on this application?
No.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Any questions for members of the board for this witness in his capacity as either a planning or traffic expert?
Mr. Galvin, could I have just one brief redirect there on something that Mr. Maynard referenced in his testimony or in his questions?
Yeah, I think that makes sense, Mr. Spur.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, just one question. Mr. Maynard asked you whether or not, again, I'll paraphrase, whether or not Ms. Dolan referenced the fact that she knew that there was parking on only one street of Waldron, on one side of Waldron. Is that correct?
Yes.
That was the question was put to you. But do her numbers tell a different story than her testimony?
Her numbers are based on two sides of parking on Waldron.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cronheim. Any questions for this witness from members of the board? Just scanning. Any questions from members of the public?
I have a
Oh,
board.
sorry. Oh, thank you, Mr. Yuko. Go ahead. Sorry, I missed you there.
That's no problem, no problem. So question in your role as planner. We've heard testimony about the federal law RLUIPA and the concerns we should have about that, and that I'm just going to read few words here out of it, that it prohibits implementation of any land use regulation that imposes a substantial burden on the religious exercise. This church has been operating for decades as it is, presumably successfully. How would you argue, would denying these variances, would that impose any burden on this church? Or how would you argue that part of RLUIPA, the substantial burden argument, with granting or improving these variances, given that they've been operating for decades as is?
Well, right now there's approximately 200 seats in the sanctuary. The application is to expand the site to allow 600 seats. So that I think that is not unreasonable to triple the parking demand, and therefore our RLUIPA would not apply.
Could you expand on that a little? I mean, why I'm not sure I follow that. Why you say it would not apply at all?
Well, if they wanted to build a 10-story building as an extreme, is that, something that's totally out of character and totally contrary to the requirements of the town, and these are a significant variation. If they were if they had a requirement of 200 parking spaces and they were providing 150 parking spaces, that's something of more reasonable request. But now what our RLUIPA is saying is that you can't have multiple services. If they had multiple services with an overlap, that's what I heard this evening, because that would be a violation of or contrary to our RLUIPA. Then you're talking about an overlap parking requirement that Betsy Dolan was talking about, that you can't restrict the use of the site, but you can restrict the intensity of the use. If you wanted to put a 10-story building on this site as an extreme, does our RLUIPA apply? I would suggest no.
But you're going so far as saying you don't think it applies to
the parking variance.
Okay, thank you.
That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Yuko. Any other questions from members of the board? I won't move as quickly this time, I promise. All right. Any questions from members of the public for this witness? All right, seeing none. I just have to apologize. I'm scrolling through a couple of screens here. Mr. Cronheim, do you have another witness for us?
Yes, we do. Beth Welsh, please. Your name and your address.
I know.
My name is.
Please. Do you swear or affirm the testimony about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
State your full name for the records by your last name.
Yes, Beth Welsh, WELSH.
And Mr. Cronheim, is she a professional witness?
She's not. She's the neighboring landowner.
Okay. You may proceed.
Tell me, are you familiar with this site?
I am.
Okay, and how are you familiar with the site?
Well, in many different ways. We own the property immediately next to the funeral parlor, and my family's been a congregant at the Unitarian Church since 1941 when my grandparents moved to Short Hills, and I think my father is the longest continuous congregant, having attended the church for 78 years.
Okay, we've heard. I'm going to start with just a question about the issue of parking in downtown Summit. Again, you heard it was the testimony of the applicant's planner that parking is not really a problem in downtown Summit. Do you agree with that assessment?
Not at all. Professionally, I'm the manager of Bassett Associates, which is responsible for a number of buildings in the downtown. I've also been a member of the board of SDI and a member of the chamber, and I spent the last 25 years totally focused on the vibrancy of our downtown, and parking is always an issue, except during a COVID pandemic or when we have other kinds of issues like the 2008 economic meltdown, you know, when everything is gone haywire, parking isn't a problem. But if the stores are full, you know, when our stores were empty, we didn't have a parking problem. But we sat around filling the stores, and you find you have a challenge.
And have you been with the parking commission as well in Summit?
I've been on this the SPAC, the Summit Parking, whatever, advisory committee, yes, for probably 10, 15 years.
Okay, great. So could you talk a little bit more just about the difficulties that, or your experience with your tenants in your across downtown Summit with parking?
Well, it's always the topic that comes up with the merchants, and it's a challenge when you're trying to tenant the retail stores, because people want to know how do their customers get in, and where do they park, and how expensive is it if you charge for it.
Is it a difficulty only with retail tenants, or do you find that also with other types of tenants?
Oh, absolutely. It's an issue in competition. When you have buildings with their own parking competing for the upper floor stores, you have to adjust your pricing to accommodate that.
What type of tenant? Just like an office tenant, or in addition to a retail tenant?
Yeah, office tenants. And of course, the office tenants are essential for the vibrancy of the downtown, because they're the ones, once their car is parked, they're buying lunch every day. They're shopping in the stores every day. If it's hard for a resident to get in to park and shop, at least the people upstairs are there every day and are buying the greeting cards and using the dry cleaner and doing all those kinds of things.
And your overall assessment of the parking in downtown Summit, then could you just give us,
Well, again, with COVID right now, it's, one of the first things I said is we're going to be really happy when we have a parking problem again, because everybody's going to come back downtown. But it is, if things are good, if things are working well, parking is a problem, and we just always had to tweak it here and there. And that's where this application, adding 135 car demand and not accommodating any of it, is concerning.
Okay. And to be clear, you own which of the lots that's next to the church? Could you describe that lot for us?
I've forgotten the year now, but a number of years ago, we combined the lots, so it's co-managed. At one point, our lot had a one-way in, one-way out, single entry exit throat right there off of Springfield Avenue, and the Burling family had the two-way in access from Summit Avenue.
Could you describe which stores would the Burling lot be, so that the board can understand
The Burling lot, or the Burling properties, start with the meat house, and we start with the Riccardi Paints and the Party Store, and then Remax, and the second floor above Remax.
And why did you combine the two lots?
It was just good. It was a good opportunity for, we didn't need to pay to supervise our lot. Most people were too chicken to go in and out of that driveway. So we didn't have that problem. But we also had, this huge warehouse in the back, and very little ability to do anything with it, because any traffic coming in and out of that throat was a problem. The Burlings were paying 100% for supervising fewer parking spaces. And so actually it was under the Kronheim management stewardship that got the parties to come together and figure out that we probably could together tenant the property so that the parking flowed. So like, for instance, the dance studio that we brought, I could never have put there without having the access to Summit Avenue, and there and afternoon into evening and weekend use, as opposed to some of the other uses in the Burlings. Just when the dance studio is kind of ramping up, the beauty salon is ramping down, and things like that. The Coke Carp is ramping down. Home Again is ramping down. And the dance studio is fairly active on the weekend, as you can imagine, because kids are out of school and they come to their dance classes. So it's been a really neat opportunity to be synergistic with 101 parking spaces, and very.
So you worked with a neighboring landowner to solve what
Absolutely.
you thought was a parking problem for your own site.
Right.
Okay. Did anyone from the applicant approach you about any sort of parking relationship, joint parking, anything similar to what the Burlings?
No.
No. Okay.
I mean, they might have to Dan's office, but not to me.
Okay. I just want to talk a little bit your experience. I know you testified that your father was a congregant and sadly passed away a few years ago. did you have the service at the church?
No, we didn't. And I know that was hard on my mom because of the affection for the place. And in fact, we had both my grandparents' services there as well. But I was very concerned because of the nature of the people coming. They were going to be older, and the parking situation on Waldron and the church itself really didn't, it would be a challenge. And I actually anticipated there would be more people than the 200-seat church could handle, which on the one hand would argue for the larger sanctuary, but you run into the same problem. We moved the service to the Lutheran church where there was a nice horseshoe drop-off to drop off people. There was private parking in the back, and there was surplus street parking along Springfield Avenue with a full sidewalk and plenty of ability for people to park and get there. And that service went on for 2 hours. I mean, that would have swamped the downtown.
Okay. Do you have any other concerns about the application?
That's really it.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Yeah, now they'll ask you some questions.
Mr. Maynor, any questions for Ms. Walsh?
Much as I'd like to talk to Beth, I have no further questions.
Any questions from members of the board for Ms. Welsh? And then I'll offer it to the public as well if anyone would like to ask Ms. Welsh any questions. All right, hearing and seeing none. Thank you, Ms. Welsh. Mr. Kronheim, any further witnesses for you?
Yes. McCormick, would you like to come up, please?
And just for everyone's benefit, I'm watching the clock. We're going to close at 9:30 for tonight's show, but we'll talk about when the next session may be held. But please proceed, Mr. Kronheim.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm a testimony about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
State your full name for the record, spell your last name.
Kimberly McCormick, MCCORMACK.
All right, your witness.
Okay. Can you tell me where do you live?
21 Waldron Avenue in Summit.
Okay, and where exactly in relation to the church is that?
It's probably about 5 or 6 houses down Waldron Avenue on the east side of the street.
Okay. Can you talk to me a little about your experience, or what did you observe? What have you observed during the time that you've lived there with respect to Sunday mornings and church services?
We moved to Waldron in 2013, and we quickly noticed on Sundays that there was just a proliferation of cars parked on the street on both sides. Didn't really notice a lot of cars parked on the street on the other days, but it did get quite crowded on Sundays, to the point where we started really observing people. Where are all these people going? Who are all these people? What is going on?
Okay, and can you describe the condition on the street? Where people, how were people parked on the street?
It's literally bumper to bumper cars, like New York City style, squeezed in bumper to bumper and right up to the edge of your driveway. When we first moved there, we didn't have the cobblestone edge on the side of the road, but when that started, shortly around that time, we started getting the orange cones from the church. They started putting out the orange cones, and that started more clearly defining where people were parking, but then they would just move the cone so they could squeeze their car in closer and squeezing, narrowing the end of your driveway.
And to the cones, I'm going to pull up actually a photograph if you'll bear with me for one moment, and I'll have you authenticate that photograph. Okay. Oops, sorry, I got to overshare the screen here. Okay.
Chris, this will be what exhibit are we marking this?
11.
11, yeah.
11, thank you.
Okay. Can you see that there?
Yes.
All right. Now, do you recognize these photographs?
Yeah, I took that photo. That's the end of my driveway. I dated it. It's January 12th, 2020.
Okay. And would you say that was this?
Well, the top photo, the white car is the end of my driveway.
Okay, great. This condition would you say this is typical of the parking that occurred on the street?
It happened very often. It had reached kind of a fever pitch, I guess you would say, where several of the neighbors, we had started meeting and talking about it. We had become aware of this church project. I think we had maybe started talking to the church about the parking that we were seeing and inquiring with them to maybe ask their members to stop doing this. Conversations had started, and I started taking photos of what I was seeing because we were having conversations about it.
Did you often struggle to get out of your driveway?
Yes, this really narrows the end of your driveway, and if you have an SUV and you're trying to pull out, and there's also bumper-to-bumper traffic on the other side of the street, it made Waldron very narrow so that you can't make that 90-degree turn with your car to kind of then proceed on your way. Plus, there's traffic coming. So you're trying to see if a car is coming, and you're trying to maneuver your large vehicle out of the end of your driveway, and it just was a really unsafe and really difficult position to get your car out.
And to be clear, there's the condition you just described, there is no longer any parking on the other side of the street.
Correct. This was around the time when those conversations were happening with the church and with the police to get the parking rules on our street changed, because it had become so frustrating that it was like this every single Sunday, literally bumper to bumper from Springfield to Whitridge, the whole street completely full. And we knew that when someone's blocking the end of our driveway, Chief Weck said, hey, call the non-emergency number, someone will come out and write a ticket. And on a day like this, I did. And then you can see on this day, there was also someone parked at 10 Waldron doing the same thing. And while I took this picture, I watched another person squeeze in and block someone else's driveway. And I walked over to the church and I spoke to the people at the front door and I said, hey, look at these photos I just took. Look at what's happening. And, it's just, it had gotten to the point where we just needed to change the rules, because you just can't be calling the police and sitting on your front porch and getting yourself all worked up and making these phone calls every Sunday and spending all your free time managing it. There has to be a better solution.
Did you consider these to be trivial or serious concerns?
Serious concerns. It was a safety issue, and the church agreed with us. The leadership of the church agreed with us. We had very cooperative civil conversations with them, and they agreed with us that the situation on our street had become unsafe and it was out of control. And although they had asked their members repeatedly to stop doing this, they would not stop doing it.
So is it your testimony that the church was unable to control the parking habits of its members?
That's what they told us, that there's no matter how many times they asked their members to not, or to use municipal parking lots, they cannot ultimately make anyone do anything. So.
What other types of things did you observe? Were people making U-turns in the street?
I know that our neighbors who live closer to the church get a lot of K-turns in their driveway. That was part of the discussion we had with the church and Chief Weck when we were deciding how to go about changing the rules. I'm a little further down, so I don't get as many of the K-turns in my driveway, but that does happen closer to the church.
And if this application were approved, do you think that this parking condition would continue?
Say it again.
If the application is approved, do you have any reason to believe that people would stop parking in this manner?
Well, we've gotten the law changed on our street so that there's parking only on one side of the street now. So that white car would not be allowed to park on our side of the street. We have no parking at all on the east side of the street. I would assume that when services resume, even if this sanctuary, the new sanctuary, is not built, I would assume that when services resume, when there's a vaccine or whatever, whenever it's safe for services to resume, I would expect that we will once again have bumper to bumper traffic the entire length of our street.
Now, is that an assumption or is that based on your experience?
Based on our experience, because we had this for 7 years that we've lived on Waldron, and as soon as COVID came and we've had quarantine-like conditions, our street has been utterly empty on Sundays. Maybe 5 cars, and we've taken pictures and looked repeatedly and checked. At the peak time of noon, 10 to noon, 10 to 1, there's maybe been 5 cars closer to the Springfield end. And that's it.
So it's your observation that these cars that you have taken photographs of were from the church?
Yes, and we watched them to see where are these people going, and we watched them walk into the church.
Do you have difficulty like this on other days of the week?
Never.
On Sunday?
Never. Even on peak weekdays, you might get an odd person parking all day long. Maybe they went to the train or something, but it's never more than 5 or 6 cars. And it's usually centered around the first 2 houses on Waldron close to Springfield.
I also want to address just very briefly. I'm going to stop the sharing, bring up your other exhibit here, Kim. And I am conscious that it's 9:25, so I will try to move this along quickly to finish with this witness. Let's see, actually. All right, here we go. This is I'll pull this up here. I'm not sure. This would be, I guess this would be 12. I can pause this. Can you, 1 second, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Do you recognize, I'm going to play this video and I'm going to ask if you recognize what it's depicting.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were you present when that video was taken?
Yes.
Okay. What is it? What is that video showing?
That's a thunderstorm on Waldron Avenue. And our street floods several times a year when we have a thunderstorm, and that is taken right in front of my house where there's one of these sewer drains that they put in several years ago that's supposed to help reduce the flooding. And basically, instead of water going down into those drains, it literally flows up, it shoots up out of those drains right in front of my house, floods our driveway, and flows back into our backyard.
And do you have concerns that the proposed plan does not in any way ameliorate these conditions?
Yes, and in fact, I was reading like the drainage study, and it seemed like they were putting, I mean, I'm no expert, but it seemed like they were at one point proposing to put more drainage down on Waldron, and then in one meeting they were talking about rerouting it back onto Springfield, but without understanding how the Springfield pipes are connected to the Waldron pipes. Our street literally cannot handle one more drop of water. It floods several times a year like that, almost impassable to cars. It gets very deep. So the drains on Waldron are not effective. And if it's connected to Springfield, it's a problem that no more drainage can be put into that system.
Do you have any other concerns about the application that you want to add?
Parking and drainage were our main issues, but there are other neighbors on Waldron who have other concerns about it as well. Neighbors who live closer to the church have concerns about other issues.
Great. We'll call them then.
Yep.
All right. That's all for this witness.
Just a quick question, Mr. Cronin. When was that video taken? Do you have a date for that?
July 2020.
Yeah, July 2020. We can get the exact date from the time on the video.
Just for the record, that's fine. Mr. Maynor, any questions for this witness?
Just 1 or 2 quick questions. I just want to be sure. Ms. McCormick, you testified there's no parking problem during the week. Is that correct?
We don't see that bumper to bumper traffic during the bumper to bumper parking during the week, correct?
Okay. And there's currently now with the new rules, there's no parking along the side where your house is. That's correct?
That's correct. It was Chief Weck's recommendation that people park on the west side so that they wouldn't have to cross the street to go to church.
Okay. And do you know, or are you aware whether the church joined in and supported the neighbor's application to change the rules to one-side parking?
The church leadership was with us when we wrote the proposed phrasing. The church leadership came with us to the city hall when we met with Chief Weck. They were aligned with us. So they're probably in the minutes of that meeting. And yes, I mean, I would characterize them as saying they were fully in support of it. I believe they said things like, we are aligned, we are in support of this.
Okay, thanks a lot. That's all I have.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Any questions from members of the board? Seeing none. Any questions from members of the public? All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Kronheim, thank you as well. All right, Mr. Maynor, good effort tonight. So Chris is telling me that we're looking at January 20th as the next full session we can offer to
Can I
carry
ask
this
a
case.
question of Mr.
Yes, Mr.
Kronheim?
Gellman.
How many more witnesses do we have? Do we have a list?
We have a handful more.
What does that mean?
I'm not 3 or so, I would say. I'm not obligated, nor will I provide a list in advance.
What do you mean you're not obligated?
I'm the objector. I don't have to provide you with a witness list.
I don't think you can support that statement, big guy. But
I certainly
I think as a matter of courtesy to the board, I want to know how much harder we have to work. And
I'd be happy that question. I would be more than happy to answer you. As for providing the names of our residents who will testify, that I certainly don't have to provide. I would say you have probably another 30 to 45 minutes worth of testimony if I were to estimate.
Okay.
So
we got to have stability here, right? So
that's a two-way street, Mr. Galvin.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
I haven't been civil, Mr. Cronin.
We'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you both. All right. So, Mr. Maynard, we're looking at January 20th for the next full
Great.
session.
Thank
that works
you.
for you? Okay.
That works for me.
And Mr.
Happy
Cronheim,
holidays, everybody, and
very
thank
much.
you.
All right. So we're going to take a 5-minute recess now. Members of the board, after you're done grabbing a snack and a cup of coffee, come back. We have some administrative matters.
Did we have a motion to, I heard agreeing to the date. Did we have a motion for the date?
That's right.
You should do that.
Thank you, Tom. So we have a motion for to carry this case, 4 Waldron Avenue, Beacon Unitarian Church, to January 20th, 2021.
So moved.
Thank you, Tom. Second.
Without further notice, correct?
Without further notice. Mr. Maynard, it's okay?
That's good for us. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Do we have a second to the motion?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Thank you, Chris. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Back in 5 minutes for those that are board members, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Spur, did you want us to stick around as consultants?
Only if you have any comments. And I don't know if you saw, Mr. Sniggers. I'm sorry if you didn't. The annual report or the calendar.
Oh, okay. I did not actually see that yet. I'd be happy to stick around. I just
If
want
you
to.
can, just for a few minutes, we'll move quickly
Absolutely.
through this. And we can get you a copy, of course, for the annual report, just to take a peek at.
Thank you. And again, thank you for your understanding about my earlier conflict. I was able to get out of that fairly quickly.
Thanks for the heads up. No, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Hello, Joe. Thanks for joining. Oh, no longer Rotary Joe. He's there. You go.
Figured I ought to get right, you know. There it is.
Let's get Mr. Millay back here. Wyman, if you can hear us, come back.
Can I ask a question off record?
You're on YouTube, so.
I know. If I wanted to see that video again, is there a way to get a copy of that?
Yes. We should be able to do that.
Okay.
You can watch it on YouTube tomorrow morning. Just scroll through to that point of the meeting and you can watch it.
Yeah, it was almost at the end. Go to the end and go backwards.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, we could have got it some other way if you needed it. You know.
Chris, are you going to put that on the website with all the other docs?
Yes, sir. Goes the following day.
Oh, so it'll be on the website anyway?
Yep.
Okay.
And you might want to update the exhibit list and pass it around to both sets of attorneys.
Yeah, we're sticking with 010 and 11 now.
Yeah, I think so. Unless you want to give us a new version.
Okay.
But I think you should do that. Just leave it at 010 and 11, but just show us.
I mean, oh, Iman, you there with us? I saw you came off of mute at least. Oh, there he is. All right, now we got the whole crew. All right, Michelle, you're ready? Yep. Thank you so much. All right, so we're back on the agenda. First up is resolutions for memorialization. Chris?
Yeah, first resolution is 12 Dogwood Drive, application DB 20-2025. Eligible voting members are Vice Chairwoman Newell, Mr. Yuko, Mr. Mullen, Mr. Millay, and Mr. Williams. Somebody like to move the approval?
Move for approval?
Second.
Vice Chairwoman Newell,
Yes.
Mr. Yuko,
Yes.
Mullen,
Yes.
Millay,
Yes.
Mr. Liketts. I can't hear Mr. Liketts.
Yeah.
There we go. And second resolution is 37 Beacon Road, application ZB 20-2019. Eligible voting members are Vice Chairwoman Newell, Mr. Yuko, Mr. Mullen, and Mr. Millay.
So moved.
Seconded?
Okay, Vice Chairwoman Newell,
Yes.
Mr. Yuko,
Yes.
Mullen,
Yes.
and Mr. Millay.
Yes.
And, we have a set of minutes from November 2nd, 2020 to approve. Somebody wants to move that?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? And seeing none.
All right, thank you, Chris. So next up is our annual report. So maybe Dennis, can you give us 30 seconds? What is the annual report? Why are we doing it? And what's it going to do for us as a community?
Okay. The annual report is something that all zoning boards are required to do. Interestingly, the zoning board has really nothing to do with the master plan and zoning ordinance generally. The only time you're going to get any input is when we do the annual report. And the basic philosophy of the annual report is to take a look at the cases you've had in the last 12 months and see if you can identify any patterns or any things that are occurring in our cases that might require the governing body or the planning board to consider making adjustments to either the master plan and or the zoning ordinance. We've had different levels of interest from the board over my tenure here, and there have been times when the board had many issues and very detailed thoughts, and there have been times when those thoughts were listened to, and there are other times when those thoughts weren't listened to. The planning board and the governing body has no obligation to act on any of your recommendations. So if we do have a recommendation, we should be smart about it and consider that. And also, I think the way to do it is more or less to think of it like Jeopardy. If you think that there's a stormwater problem, you don't say there's a stormwater problem. You kind of say, would you believe that there's a stormwater problem? Or we think you should investigate whether there's a stormwater problem.
Perfect.
You're just alerting them to things.
Yeah. And for those that haven't seen the prior years one, I give Tom a tremendous amount of credit. He did a good job with prior boards in constructing, detailed, thoughtful, well evidenced and researched items. I think one item that did get carried forward into the new DRO was the exercising of generators, which is permissible. What did Andy say, Dennis? Monday to Friday, 12 to 4, I think it was what's in the new DRO.
Yeah, yes. That's a good example of, even though that's something that I've been spouting in all the towns for a while, I find that once you pass it along to the governing body, they have different views. In Stafford, New Jersey, I was trying to help them by creating that standard, and they decided to make it from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. It's just, I thought limiting it is better, but each community is different.
So the board members were sent, and I apologize, Mr. Snickis and Mr. Dower, we didn't send you this prior, but so what the actual annual report or the document consists of is 3 parts: a resolution for us to approve, acknowledging that we're doing this thing, the report itself, which is a list of recommendations, and then third, a list of the applications that we heard and the results and the variances that were approved through them. And this was for 2019, for the full year of 2019. So just in brief, and I would welcome, Mr. Sneckis and Mr. Dower, if there's something egregious that, and I apologize for putting this on you so late, that you think we're missing is of particular importance for us to flag. I don't necessarily mind carrying this and amending it moving forward, but just briefly, I'll highlight the items that we carried forward first, and then the new items that we're bringing to their review. So what we carried forward from prior annual reports was discussion of the steep slope limits. Tom is probably familiar with this language. It's about looking at a percentage of total lot coverage impacted, for example, as opposed to just a strict numerical limit, or rather minimum threshold for steep slope to be examined. Expanding the definition of permeable driveways, where today that is not included in, or rather is included as impermeable surface, and we think that's worth investigating. Decking considered to be impervious lot coverage. We find in most applications where they're requesting additional coverage, that is in fact decking, that it does drain water. I'm sure there are instances of some deck design that's not the case, but that was something else we carried forward. And then the final item that we carried forward was with respect to variance applications in general, and Dennis helped provide a little bit of a tweak to this. We'd like to see more photographs submitted as part of the applications, specifically of rear yard and side yards that aren't visible, not just from Google Maps, but visible from the streets, if and when, not just the board members or the board professionals can't view the properties, but the public as well. So those are the ones we carried forward. The new additions for this year are twofold. The first being neighborhood stormwater management. So Mr. Millay and I know talked about this. This has long been a point of contention for me, is I think in certain areas of town, we continue to see whole neighborhoods that are encountering flooding and stormwater management issues. And I think the municipality is largely aware of them. But in the context of the zoning board, what we're seeing applicants needing to do is to perhaps oversize stormwater management controls on their lot as a result of not addressing these neighborhood flooding issues, which is really the responsibility of the municipality. So this is something we flagged for them, citing Wallace Road, Canoe Brook Parkway, and Iris Road as an example.
I'm sorry, what parkway?
Sorry, Canoe Brook Parkway.
And then, okay.
And Iris Road as an example of that area. So again, as Dennis was saying, something to investigate. This is a fairly regular occurrence that we've observed, that we think is kind of it's being reflected through these zoning board applications, and something that we'd ask the planning board, the municipality, to seek to address. And then the second point that we added was communication of pending applications. So, and I've heard this with respect to especially some of the more, it's not the right description, but significant or potentially impactful applications that we have. Beacon Unitarian, the daycare on Park Avenue. Some of those cases we get a feeling from neighbors and others in the community that perhaps they didn't get sufficient notice. And I think while the city does a good job with putting the application information up on the zoning board website, there may be more they can do to share the zoning board cases that are coming up and are maybe of interest to the public. The other side of that coin, though, is where there's little steep slope variances requested or side yard setbacks, it probably doesn't need to be blasted across all of the social media channels for the city. But this is, again, I think a good example of something we can flag for the city. Those guys collecting all those big paychecks down at City Hall to go and solve for us. So those are the two new ones. I don't know if, I hopefully you had a chance to read what we sent through. Liz, myself, Dennis, Andy, we all scrutinized it. Chris had a chance to look at it, but anything you find there particularly objectionable or missing, I suppose would be the question to you.
Nothing objectionable missing, but I think you clarified it in my mind. So that communication pending application. So what you're thinking of is maybe the city may be using social media channels to promote, or not promote, that's right, wrong word, to advise the public of things like the church application, or because obviously we're complying with all legal requirements, so there's nothing legally that has to be done.
Right, and I think what Dennis and I were talking about at length was we don't believe it would be inappropriate for the municipality to single out one particular case for promotion, right, through its various channels. So, if they wanted to entertain this conversation, I might suggest more prominent placement on the website or some inclusion in some other regular and recurring communication by the municipality. I mean, Dennis and I were talking about, hopefully over time or elsewhere, the cities may accumulate email lists, for example. So there may be other channels that cities, and Summit being one of them, obviously could use to share this information, but it's left to them how they want to prioritize the use of those communication platforms.
I mean, one of the things that we talked about is it doesn't seem, it feels odd that the municipalities really haven't started collecting people's email addresses or their cell phones. And, you could do a reverse 911. The police can send a message to every single person in the community. You might think that if people submitted their email address, say you're somebody who just wants to be interested, anytime that there's a new land use application, if you're on that list, somebody just clicks a button and we send them notification of the new application.
Well, am I wrong, Chris?
Wait a
Can't they do
That
that now?
exists now.
Yeah, that exists. That's
Sign
what I'm
up for
saying.
the
That
email.
I
exists
mean,
now.
if you have an agenda item, I mean, if you click on, you get the agenda for this meeting in your email box.
Yeah, I think they can do
Every
that
time
now.
we get one, I get one for the planning board as well.
Yeah.
I mean, that already exists. I think this is more of a role for our council liaison, which I'm assuming our council liaison here and there watches what we do, other than provide input onto who they're going to appoint to the vacancies, et cetera. But isn't it, if they're watching what the issues are that are coming up on our agenda, they give reports at every single council meeting, and they should be encouraged to tell people, gee, the Beacon is coming up and might be something that a lot of people are involved in, or the Overlook Hospital Garage, or the Park Avenue Daycare Center. I've seen them do this with the planning board for the child care center on the other side of town, just on a different board, because one of the members of the council sits on that board. I mean, I think we have to, get that word to them some way. And I don't know if you can reword that to somehow get them to take some responsibility for putting it out in their channels as the elected officials.
Yeah, no, I think the hope of the annual report is if the governing body, the planning board, feels like these are particularly salient points, that would spark a discussion and hopefully action. I'm not saying I want a Nixle alert every time that I get a new zoning board case. I get enough text messages from the city, admittedly, but yeah, I mean, to your point, Joe, I think there's a number of different avenues that zoning board applications, and this is not just us, I think, trying to puff up our ego, right, that we want our names in any more places, but there are instances certainly where zoning board cases maybe slip through the cracks of interested neighborhoods that fall out of that 200-foot radius notice area, and that perhaps the city, in the review of, and I hope they do that with some frequency, their communications programming can say, hey, this is relevant information that could be communicated in a different way. So that's it. We're not trying to solve this. This is a paragraph within an annual report. If they think it's ripe for action, then I'll point them right back to you, Joe, and you can give them all your thoughts.
I mean, is this a solution in search of a problem? I feel like the only ones that generate controversy are commercial cases. And usually when there's a commercial case that is somewhat controversial, there is no real issue getting word of mouth out there.
Especially when they're held over multiple nights.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think these are, interesting recommendations. I think it's important that we keep, both a balance of some more general points, around, for example, stormwater management or the inclusion of photos in the applications, as well as specific potential revisions to the DRO. But largely, I don't think these are controversial. This will help us check our statutory box of submitting the report, and in good time as well, right? That we won't carry this any longer than we have to.
The other thing too is there are going to be years where you have really important stuff to say, and not every year is going to be like that.
So, Mr. Snakis or Mr. Dower, anything you want to add, or anything that's been really just bothering you that you need to get off your chest and potentially include it in the annual report?
I won't keep it personal, but but anyway, regarding the multiple items that you called out that are reoccurring, I'll definitely bring that back to my staff, Tom Behrens, who attends the day-to-day meetings there. But also at the same time, as this board may know, your annual report's circulated to the planning board as well, who does institute some of the ordinance amendments. We did just go through the DRO update, so there's probably certain things that were decided at the time. And I'll find out any responses that you're deserving maybe a response of why maybe something wasn't considered or things of that nature. Because for instance, one of the things that pops off the page to me is the issue of decks. I totally agree it doesn't count towards impervious coverage, but sometimes that percentage is used to make sure the building bulk or the ultimate bulk of building on a property is regulated in some way. So that's sometimes the backstory, and maybe you deserve some of that feedback in order to hear where maybe some things weren't considered or how they have been considered. So I will definitely circulate this back.
That'd be great. I think some of that feedback would make for an interesting part of some kind of training session as well, just to kind of, see some more utility out of this exercise other than just to satisfy the state of New Jersey, state legislatures, requirement. Mr. Dower, anything that caught your eye that you think we should
No, I
tweak or add?
agree with the issue with the driveways. We've discussed that, why are they considered to be impermeable when gravel would seem to be, from common sense, is permeable, certainly a lot more than asphalt. So that the neighborhood stormwater issues, we just saw something about Waldron tonight. And the steep slopes, definitely that's a good point, because if it's a percentage of the lot, and we do usually ask for them to give a percentage, or we figure out a percentage so that we know what the impact is going to be. So they're all very good points. And it's something that I think is important for the city to see, the engineering department to see, to make comments on it too, get their feedback.
So barring any real objections here, I would say let's move the resolution. Let's get it off our plates and move on to other business. But any other comments or objections before we ask for a motion for the resolution? No. All right. I like you guys. All right. So with that, is there a motion to approve this resolution?
So moved.
Second.
I'll second it.
Thank you. And Chris, I think you need a roll call on this.
Yeah, Dennis, you want a roll call or voice?
Do roll call.
Okay. Chairman Spur,
Yes.
Vice Chairwoman Newell,
Yes.
Mr. Yuko,
Yes.
Mr. Steiner,
Yes.
Mr. Mullen,
Yes.
Ms. Schwartzstein,
Yes.
Mr. Millet,
Yes.
Mr. Loikitz. And Ms. Coe.
Sure, yes.
And make sure you guys have a nice space on your mantle for the 500-page DRO that's going to come your way.
All right.
I don't want to know how many times that thing's been printed, though, right? As a taxpayer here in the city of Summit, but anyway.
We try to minimize that, so it's not very often. So.
All right. I know it's been approved and reapproved a few times at this point, but that's a subject for another night. With respect to the calendar, Chris, what do we need to do with that? Is there anything we need to do?
If you guys want more time with it, you can review it again and then adopt it at the 22nd December meeting. If you guys are comfortable with the dates that are already there, we can adopt it tonight. We approve at each calendar like the extra 4 meetings from January to February, so those are already locked in. So, I leave that to the discretion of the board, how they want to proceed with that.
Anyone have any feeling about this? Otherwise, I'm all for just clearing administrative items off our
I actually
calendar.
did look at all the dates and don't see a problem with any of them.
I think, remember, you can always change them.
Yeah. The one thing I always check after a snafu a few years ago is our first meeting after the first council meeting. And this, I did check that. It's the council meeting is January 5th. So if we have new appointees or whatever, they're done.
That, just for future reference, Steve, that creates a big problem.
Yeah, that was a big problem, especially one year.
No quorum.
Oh, no. All right. So with that then thank you, Tom, for that good reminder. So Chris, would you just need a motion to approve? And
Yep. Motion second, and I think we can voice vote this unless Dennis says otherwise.
No, we can voice vote it.
Cool. All right. Do we have a motion to
So moved.
approve the meeting schedule? Mr. Steiner, motions, second?
Second.
There's that Catherine. Let's give it to Catherine.
Okay.
I didn't say it.
No, you didn't? No, who said it? I heard a female voice. Come on.
I think it was Liz.
Is it Liz? All right, Liz. Sorry. Okay. Sorry, Liz.
Oh,
All right. Sorry, Catherine.
Okay, it's Kaylee.
yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. It passes. Excellent. All right. That'll conclude the meeting for this evening, though. I think we need a motion to move into executive session where we'll be discussing.
So Ed and Chris can leave.
Good night, everybody.
Right.
Thank you, Ed and Chris. Yes. Thanks for
Good
staying.
night, everybody. Have a great holiday.
Mrs. Vandenberg, we're going to go into executive session. I don't know if you can hear me.
We have a second Zoom link, Dennis, we're going to use, and we're going to kick you out too because we're talking about board professionals.
That's right, but I got to read the executive session first.
All right, good, do it.
All right. All right. I just sent it to you in email. I sent it to Chris in an email. Whereas NJSA 10:4-12 of the Open Public Meetings Act permits the exclusion of the public from a meeting in certain circumstances set forth in paragraph B. And whereas this public body is of the opinion that such circumstances presently exist. Now therefore be it resolved by the Zoning Board of Adjustment of the City of Summit, County of Union, State of New Jersey as follows. 1, the public shall be excluded from the board's discussion of the herein specified matter. 2, the general nature of the subject matter to be discussed is, hold on, section I, matters involving employment, termination, appointment, or related employment matters for the position of board professionals pursuant to NJSA 10:4-12B8. It is anticipated that the minutes of this above discussion will be made available within 30 days after the appointment of the board professionals. This resolution shall take effect immediately. Steve, you should sign a copy of this resolution and send it to Chris. We need a motion to move into executive session.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Who seconded it? I'm sorry.
Tom Yuko.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I only heard Mr. Steiner. So moved.
Tom Yuko seconded.
Tom Yuko seconded, yep.
Okay. When I say, I don't know who's going to take the minutes, somebody needs to take a minutes. Chris is going to take the minutes, but the minutes just have to be very broad-based. You don't have to be you don't have to be too detailed. All right. But you should have some executive session minutes so we don't get in trouble.
Will that meeting be recorded or not?
No, shouldn't be recorded, in my opinion. That's why Chris is going to take notes. And I will be available if there's any reason you need to reach me. Okay? Peace and love. Good luck.
Thank you very much, everyone. All right, we have a new link in our email that Chris sent us. So that's your executive session Zoom link.
See you in a minute.
See you over there.
That's
Thank you,
not,
everyone.
that's not recorded by me, right?
Not recorded, Michelle. You're done for the night. Thank you.
Have a good night.